Welcome to the Spotlight on Marketing, and I'm your host, Karen Lloyd. Today we are joined by Stephen O'Brien. Stephen is a fractional CMO and exco, known for fueling business growth by utilising sales and marketing strategies. His career spans significant roles at notable corporations, including BlackBerry, BT, LogicaCMG and Marconi, where he was instrumental in driving significant innovation and business growth. So it's great to have you on the show today, Stephen. So let's dive in.
Hello. Yeah, yes, a fantastic intro. Thank you so much.
No, you're very, very welcome. Can you share a little bit about your journey in the technology sector and what's led you to specialising in the scaling tech businesses?
Well, I'll try and keep it short. It's been a long journey, but my background is not in marketing or pure business. My background is in IT. As a teenager, I did actually start as a software developer back in the early days when people were first getting home PCs. And we were all getting very excited about the ability to code on these PCs. We had things like Atari 800s and Commodore 64s and BBC Micros. People of a certain vintage may remember. We would see new games arrive in the local arcades. We would play them a little bit, and then we would go home and have a competition to see who could sort of code up the best version. And I sent a small high score table written in BASIC to computer and video games magazines in the US, and they published it and sent me a check for $40. And I suddenly thought, as a sort of 17-year-old, I thought, oh, gosh, maybe I could do that. And so after studying systems analysis in Dublin, I came to London. I joined London Electricity as a programmer on mainframes, and then moved about 4 years later to CMG, my first ever consulting job. But it was while freelancing at BT, writing SQL, actually on a Teradata, that I first realized that marketers were asking questions of analysts, and analysts were giving them the data, and no one was proactively mining the data. And in those days, the early stages of data mining was coming along. So I put in a proposal to BT and said we needed some hardware, some software, and of course somebody to run it. That would be me. And we built this data mining unit, which was very successful, but we were specifically dealing in the marketing space. And I was very excited by where marketing, tech and data all met. And that really steered my direction from there. My big chance then came in 2003 when I met a guy who had a vision for building a full service marketing agency, primarily a digital marketing agency in London. And he had a sort of 5-year plan, and he needed somebody to start it off and run it for him. And we started off as 2 people in an office in Berkeley Square. And we built it up from there, and I never looked back really. I've still continued in consulting and business, but the marketing side and the communication side and looking after and communicating with customers is what's been my passion ever since, really.
And yes, I am of the same vintage as you. I think I do remember those early computer games and that ability to code. But I must admit, I wasn't. I think I managed to change the colour of the screen with my own coding, and that's about it, because it was quite arduous. But well done to actually making $40 out of that game. Is a really super impressive. Actually, I don't know anyone else that did that.
I don't think I ever cashed the check, actually.
Oh, really? Why didn't you cash it?
I don't know. It just seems like a prize rather than money. Yeah.
Yeah, no, exactly. Oh, how wonderful. No, that's great. Well, I think we've already spoken a bit about your early career and some of the challenges, but over your career, what do you think one of the most significant challenges you faced from a sort of marketing perspective that you've had to overcome with any of the businesses you've worked with?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is the perception of marketing. One of the things in businesses, particularly tech businesses, and that's maybe it's the specific challenge maybe that's drawn me in, because I do like a challenge. One of the challenges in tech businesses is that they tend to be sales led. The senior executives have mostly come through a sales route, and quite often the CEO will have a background in sales or leading a sales business. And sales is necessarily in its mindset, driven by commission plans and short-term targets, and most of the sales guys make their commission on achieving certain numbers by certain dates, and it's all really quite quick and very transactional in its focus. And that doesn't always work. If you're perhaps a very, very transactional business selling things that just cost $20 and you just order them online, that might potentially be something where you just throw paid advertising at it and you concentrate on sales. But for most businesses, it's a little more subtle than that. Customers think about products that they're going to buy. They think about services. And particularly in a lot of tech businesses, which are B2B, the sales cycles are a little longer. And there's a need to spend money further away from the sales transaction than most salespeople are comfortable with. Works fine if the long-term pipeline is coming through, but the big challenge always is keeping companies happy that the money you're spending to nurture customers who may not buy for a year are still worth spending money on. When push comes to shove, costs, slight slowdown in growth, any of those things that scare financial directors, the first thing they do is ask why we do anything vaguely termed brand. And that's usually the start of a downward cycle.
It's really interesting you say that, actually, because in this current climate, I'm interviewing so many people and they've said I've been made redundant, or they've cut layers of marketing out. And the reason they have is because the company have now moved to a sales-led priority. And I think we were talking about this yesterday, actually, that they're moving to sales-led, or they're using to product-led, and they're using to this siloed-based style of growing a business. And for me, I always think that it's really short-sighted for a company to do that, and they're missing a bit of the picture. What's your view on that take?
Yeah, absolutely. And ironically, in many sort of transactional sales-led tech businesses, particularly small and mid-size companies, they often have a view that their path to growth, especially if they've had consultants in, this is very common, you bring consultants in and they want the consultants to produce a big report for them that tells them what the right path is to growing the business. And quite often the path to growing the business is not just to do more of what you're doing, but to move up the perception of the value chain, to start selling more value add, to stop selling products and maybe call them solutions, to start bundling products together into solutions, and making it more of a high value offering to customers. Now, as soon as you do that, that may be absolutely correct, but it takes you an awfully long way away from a transactional sales mentality. And if you want to grow a business by moving up the value chain, you need to recognize that they're more complex sales. The messages and solutions that you're explaining to potential prospects become more complex, and the timescales become very long. And we have this odd sort of binary view of marketing where it's either brand, which is all very wishy-washy and it doesn't bring any money in. It's just sort of something that marketers love to do. And then you have something which is kind of really almost advertising. It's almost the sales transaction itself. I want the guy to click on this and give me 50 quid. But there's a whole world of stuff in between that, and the nuances are often lost. Quite often the brand is seen as something you can cut, and all the money should be put into pay-per-click. And I would challenge any business that's trying to move up a value chain that is absolutely the opposite of what they need to be doing. And what they need to start building is all of the machinery between the initial brand impression that you're trying to build and the long, gentle funnel of people who may start to like your company, but may not be going to buy for another 18 months. What are you going to do in those 18 months that's worthwhile and will give the company a return? You're going to be useful. You're going to be present. You're going to be helpful. You're going to be consultative. You're going to be generous. And you're going to be present. And by the time they move along and have got used to receiving your documents and receiving the odd little, have you seen this report, perhaps coming to the odd breakfast to get an update on some aspect that's related to what they're thinking about. By the time they get to a position where they're thinking, we need to go ahead now and upgrade this system or buy this service or review this part of the business, you'll be in the top of mind and you'll be in the shortlist before you even start the process. And that's the power of marketing, I believe.
I 100% agree. And actually, if you think about it, professional services companies, they were the pioneers in this approach. They were the ones, you think lawyers and accountants, way before technology was even really on the radar. They've been doing that sort of thought leadership style approach for many, many years, actually, being top of mind for when, we don't always need a lawyer every day. But when you do, that style of sort of, a mentality really works. I must admit, I think I shared this with you before, but I recently had somebody who said that the CEO felt felt that marketing was about the logo. And over the weekend, they developed a Canva logo and decided they were going to rebrand the whole company based on the logo they made over the weekend. And they had this real strong belief that the CEO had the strong belief that that was what branding was about. And it just shows that, as you said, there's a much bigger picture than just, seeing that part of a company and having that ongoing relationship really with a company and that top of mind. So yeah, I 100% concur with that.
And I'd just add to that as well that there's a temptation for marketers to sort of complain about this and go, oh, then sales don't get it and CEO doesn't get it. There's a line of thinking which says if you say something to somebody and they don't understand you, it's your problem, not theirs, because you're trying to get across a piece of information. So I think for marketers, we constantly have to revisit the way in which we satisfy the immediate needs of our audience in the boardroom, while making space for the marketing team to demonstrate what these longer term initiatives can actually deliver to the business. So I think certainly in larger organizations, a large part of my job as CMO has been to provide air cover almost for marketing, to get enough support in the boardroom and enough space in the boardroom so that my team can do the things that they know they need to do, which if presented as actual projects might be rejected by the board as a bit wishy-washy, or I don't see the benefit of that, or it's too long term. So that's part of it. We have to find ways to get enough space to get the time we need to show the benefits of things like, account-based marketing, to build inbound marketing tech stacks. And then you start to show what they start to do down the line. And you make sure that when we land a £10 million contract with a business, that you can show that they attended a conference and met you 2 years earlier. And ever since, you've been sending them emails and reports, and they opened this report twice and it was shared in their business, and use all the marketing tracking and stuff that we can do to show the benefit of what we've done, even though it might be claimed by the sale. I remember giving a presentation in one company where I used the analogy of Gary Lineker winning a very famous match. There's a picture of him that you can find all over the internet of him sliding in and scoring this goal. And everybody remembers the goal. But they don't remember what happened beforehand. And what I showed was 6 slides of the preceding 6 touches and how it went right back to the goalie, and how the ball had been passed around, the space had been made, a dummy run, all the things that contributed to the opportunity for Gary, the sales guy, to close the deal. So you've got to prove it. And that's the challenge for the marketer, not for anybody else. Nobody owes you an acceptance. You have to explain yourself.
Absolutely. I think you're 100% right. I think a lot of companies, one of the problems is they're not tracking and measuring and understanding what the process is really from start to finish. So they can't say, oh, how did we, other than, oh, well done, Gary was the one that got the deal over the line, hurrah, rather than it actually being, well, actually, we touched this person 7 times, because also it's a learning curve, isn't it? How many times do you need to touch somebody? How many times do you need to do this? What methodology works, rather than, oh, well, I got the deal in. And I think that's something I always look at my team, and we always have new companies that work with us. We look at how was the path we got there, and I think that's a really brilliant way to look at it, if you're going back and reflecting on success rather than just cheering that you've got success. Interesting enough, in this current market, it's a bit of a tricky economy at the moment, and I'm speaking to a lot of people who are saying that they're just about ticking by, and they're not actually growing, and it's the lack of sales team closing deals. And as we said, no one really aspires to have a business that just stands still or is going backwards. So there is a catalyst of growth and a desire for it, but that doesn't mean to say it's going to happen. So could you share any sort of key triggers or actions that you think have effectively spurred scaling and growth, even in a tough market?
Well, I think if I take a slight step back, I don't want to spend too long, but you could really unpick this one. Every business is keen to grow, and the problem is it doesn't always mean the same thing to everybody in the business. There's revenue balanced against profit. There's investment versus cost. There's short term, medium term, long term. There's the overall business strategy. objectives and timescales might vary hugely between a majority founder-led business, say, versus I don't know, a private equity-backed business. And all of these things bring in additional risk that you end up with senior people in the business not all pulling in the same direction. So you often hear financial directors in particular talking about growing profits. But you can have growing profits in a shrinking business for a while at least, and then the business is gone. If I think back to, what's an example? When I was CEO at Cube Online, the objective of that business was to grow at phenomenal speed with no regard for what that cost. It was a market share grab, basically. And I and my executive agreed a 3-year funding plan with the investors that would deliver the required trajectory. Very, very fast growth and expansion. We went from 0 customers to 12,000 customers in the UK in 18 months, and we launched in 8 countries around the world. And that cost money. That was at the expense of any short-term profit. But that was the strategy. Now, that might not be appropriate or accepted in a lot of other companies. Other companies that might say it doesn't matter how slowly we grow, provided it's within a framework of at least some profitability. That's all that's acceptable to the board. So it depends what's happening. What drives it typically is a sense that, in my view, there's 2 ways. There's either businesses which are growing and intend to grow and are continually raising money, and there's that constant falling forward. And you see that in lots of businesses that go up like a rocket. And sometimes they stay up there and sometimes they come down. WeWork obviously being a recent example of incredible growth that stalled. But many other companies realize that they need to start looking at their growth options when their core bread and butter offering is starting to flag. This is where I would wave the flag for consultants. One of the things about businesses is they often don't see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, simply because that's what they do on a day-to-day basis. And one of the things about coming in as a consultant, people say, oh, gosh, you must be better than everybody if you go in as a consultant. Not at all. You might be good at some things. The biggest advantage of bringing in a consultant, and I don't mean 50 people to create some monster report. I mean, bringing in fractional guys like me to, perhaps spend 6 months with the CEO helping out on some of his or her challenges, is a fresh pair of eyes. Am I allowed to tell a joke? If it's a very short
joke. Yes, absolutely.
But my father, one of his favourite jokes was walking along the street in O'Connell Street in Dublin, and he sees a man walking along with one foot in the gutter. And he goes over to him and he taps him on the shoulder and he says, excuse me, do you realise you're walking along with one foot in the gutter? And the man looked at him for a couple of minutes. He said, oh my God. He said, thank you so much. For 30 years, I thought I had a limp. It's
a brilliant
It's a very
one.
silly joke, but when I go into companies sometimes, I see people walking with one foot in the gutter. It's that simple. You just tell them. And that's the power of having somebody come into your business from outside, I think.
Yeah, I agree. The thing is, you don't always know, do you? You don't always know how you behave. Some people aren't so they're not good at reflecting inside or outside, or sometimes I think people who lead companies and grow businesses, they're brilliant, but they're very tunnel focused, like you said, on growth or on one aspect, and it's hard to see and do everything, isn't it? Sometimes I think
Yes.
you need to be able to ask for help and know when to ask for help. And I think the key of, if you're at a roadblock and your company isn't growing, or you're at a point where you could have more market share, but you just don't know how to get it, I think that's the time to ask for help, rather than just to keep going round and round in circles, or blaming that Gary didn't score the goal this month and get something over the line, or marketing didn't get enough leads. Then I think that's the time to sort of sit outside and reflect. So yeah, I really do get that, and I love your analogy. I think it's a brilliant one, a very visual one that we can all see. Great stuff. So obviously you've been working as an advisory board member for Shore Valley Ventures recently, and just from your experience with them and your fractional work that you've been doing, what singular piece of advice would you give to founders seeking funding in today's dynamic climate?
I think there are lots of subtleties. Research into who are the right investors for your company is absolutely key. There are all sorts of VCs out there, and angel investment groups and stuff, and they have different criteria, and it's all available on the good old internet. You can search and you can find lists of criteria, what sort of companies they're looking for, what thresholds they're looking for. But once you get a chance, you've selected somebody you'd like to invest in you, and you get a chance to go up and pitch in front of them, I'd say it's continued to be a very basic thing. The usual 3 hygiene factors that every investor looks for, what's the idea, what's the market, and what's the team. So is the idea interesting and solving a problem? Can I see it being something that becomes widespread? Is the market big enough? Are there enough people in target market to actually buy it? And is the team standing in front of me believable in terms of, can they deliver? Is this the team I think can deliver this? If you can get those 3 right, you're 95% of the way there. The question sometimes I say to absolute startups who are just starting their sort of entrepreneurial journey is, if you're going to go and stand in front of an investor, be prepared to be asked this very, very basic question. What will the money enable you to do that you can't do now? If I give you £250,000, what will it allow you to do that you're not able to do currently? Now, there might be a very good answer for that. It might be that there's product development to be done. It might be that the key to this is an explosion of market campaign and activity. It may be that it can only work if you have dedicated sales. Or it might just be to allow you to quit your job. So it might just be a founder's salary. Different investors will have different responses to that. I'm never very keen to invest in a company where I'm just paying founders' salaries, unless I'm very keen that the idea in the market is just absolutely perfectly timed. But it's a great question. What will the money I give you enable you to do that you cannot do at the moment?
Actually, I think it's a key question, because I do know of a company that really fell on its face because all they did is put the money in the bank, and the founders took the money, and that was it. And I think that also everyone in the company knew that that's what they were doing as well, and that was a reason for people to leave them, because they were like, oh, the founders are okay making rich, but we wanted to grow this business, we wanted the budget, and they're not giving us the budget to do what we want to do, and that was a really detrimental for morale. So I think it's also a really good way to manage a business. I think it's a great question for someone to have clearly in their mind the reason why, really, isn't it? That's the key question, and that also filters down and helps you give your vision to the business going forward. So yeah, I think it's a great question. In terms of sales and marketing, I know we touched on this earlier, but is there anything that you would say in sales and marketing are something that would be critical in bridging the gap between sales and marketing?
Yeah, I think it's the integration of the two. That's one of the most powerful things a company can do. I mean, my consulting background was about bringing together all of the touch points for customers. So I spent years running a customer management practice for Amdocs, which lots of people have never heard of, but it's the biggest telco consulting in the world. They've got about 30,000 people. And going around and just talking to boards of companies about how to manage the 3 parts of a customer's experience. You have in most modern companies now, you have your digital online presence, you have your physical retail presence, and you have your contact centers that speak to customers on a daily basis. And in the middle of all that, you're bringing all the touch points together. But in the middle of all that, sales and marketing also have communications in both directions with customers. And if your organization is set up so that marketing do their thing and hand over leads, which is often, the most tangible, visible, and understood part of what marketing does. Businesses go, oh, look, they handed over 200 leads this month. If you hand over those leads and then go back to your desk, then there's something wrong with the organization. You do see sometimes, executives who have a role which covers sales and marketing. You get a director of sales and marketing. I'm not sure that's exactly the answer. I think there should be representation of both, because when you have somebody who's responsible for sales and marketing, they tend to be a salesperson. And they bring in a head of marketing below them. And it's really just a disguise for the fact that marketing don't have a seat at the table. Marketing should be at the table, sales should be at the table, and their teams should be really intertwined. So they're constantly feeding off each other. Who can tell marketing more about a customer than the salespeople who are constantly talking to prospects? Huge. And who can tell sales more about what the best things are in terms of messaging than marketing, who's spending a lot of money on content and response and demand generation. So the more closely they work together, and the more you can instill process and a sense of function that brings everybody into this, they feel like they're part of the same organization rather than this sort of 2 sides of a tennis court. the more likely you are to see a prospect move through the whole of the funnel into sales and on into customer support as one long continuum, which will not just bring customers in and sell to them, but will keep them also. So just that.
I agree, and I think it is that stakeholder engagement really, and that's a key thing that I always look for when I'm interviewing marketers, because it's that ability to first of all be positive about sales rather than have that, oh, it's the sales team, and also that they are together as one team and they can push back and they can chase, but for ultimately they're on one team, which is to score the goal. Losing our Gary analogy again, but at the end of the day, they're all on the same team and they're going forward. And I think it's really powerful if companies that get it right and they can do it that way. Interesting stuff. So also it was interesting when we were having a chat before, and you said that one of your achievements is that you feel that is being very low key and always being a respectful colleague. So I just wondered how this strategy has worked for you.
Well, to me, it always just felt right. It depends on what kind of person you are, really. There are lots of ways for individuals, human beings, to get to points they're trying to get to. But for me, it always just felt right. It wasn't a strategy for success. It just felt like the right way to do. It's been fine. If I'm very honest, I can probably say I might have won a few more things if I had been a little bit pushier, if I had been a little bit meaner, a little bit more self-centered. That's probably the way life is. But overall, I like how it's gone. I think one of the things we often mistake is, going to work, you make great friends at work, but it's not about making friends. And looking after your team and the people who work for you is not about making friends. I don't subscribe to this very odd idea that the company is a family. We're a family. It's not a family. It's where people go to earn the money to bring home to their family, typically. And companies are certainly not democracies. That's also another oddity that sort of crept into the discourse. There's nothing democratic about a company. It's a hierarchy. And although bosses may test the water and see what people's opinions are about things, ultimately they make decisions, and those decisions are enforced. However, there is a right way to treat people. If you want to be hard-nosed business about it, then surely, treating people well will bring out their best and motivate them. So it'll ultimately benefit the business anyway. So even if you're looking to improve the bottom line, you should still be looking after your people and being respectful and listening to them and understanding them and making it easy for them to enjoy working in the business, making it a motivational thing where they want to come into the business and they feel part of the business's success. And then the business will benefit every which way. I can't understand why you would do it any other way.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, at the end of the day, as you said, you may have, if you've been meaner or nastier or done something a different way, it might have got you ahead. But ultimately, I do think there's a sense of karma, and I think what goes around does come around. And I think sometimes just treating nice people nicely, sometimes doing something that isn't necessarily going to benefit you or the business, but because it's the right thing to do, it's just being a human being. And I think companies that have that approach, certainly when things have been tough, those companies I see that have a leader with that attitude, for me, is much more appealing, and people want to stay in those companies. And I think it's a way to be, but not everybody is like that. And sometimes people say they're like that, and actually they don't behave like that. And I think it's quite transient. But I can definitely sense that around you, that you've got that that humble leadership, which I think is a beautiful combination. I'm also a big fan of personal growth and learning and reading and doing stuff. And I think that's something you also share. So what things do you do to stay informed with market trends, and how do you sort of keep ahead of your own personal growth?
Well, I think it's incredible where we've got to with the amount of information that's available for free. I sort of follow, there are certain platforms I love. I think Twitter, if you curate your feed very carefully in Twitter, there's the most incredible wealth of really, really clever, innovative, interesting people writing and giving away information for free. So I read lots of articles, read the odd book, but mostly I would say on top of that, it's keeping in close contact with the people out there in businesses, the people who are your ecosystem when you're working, businesses, consultants, agencies, the people who provide certain products and services. That's where all the innovation is happening, where all the new ideas are being tested. And if you stay involved and keep in touch with people, you have a better feel for what's going on. So I'm often in town just simply having lunch to catch up with somebody, just to stay in touch with what's going on. I stay in touch with lots of people. I work with lots of businesses. I go to pitches. I go to pitch nights. And I even I jointly run and founded some time ago a meetup group in West London called Richmond New Tech. It's quite small. We have about 50 people meet in a pub once a month with a guest speaker. We have about 2,000 passive members. But again, in the conversations I have with the people who are part of that community, I hear new ideas. I think of things. I look at things differently. I hear things being linked that I didn't think were linked, and you just stimulates new thinking. I'd finally add, I've always liked the idea of mentoring, not as a very formal function, but mentoring and being mentored are brilliant ways to stay engaged, to continue learning, and to stay stimulated. At any one time, I always have one or two people who give me a little bit of time, a couple of times a year, just to chat through things, to ask me how I'm doing, to give me a steer, to listen to what I'm saying about what I think I'm doing and tell me whether I'm right or not. And similarly, there are always a few people I'm chatting to and hoping to help them a little bit along their career. If everybody does that, the world is wonderful and everybody learns.
Do you know what? I think that was a big turning point for me. In lockdown, I started to get involved with mentors and mentoring others and people mentoring me. And I've got a couple of people which we partner each other. And I think it's, as a business owner, it's really great to have someone that's got your back, and someone that you can go to and be really transparent with. And, not every day in everyone's life is perfect. And, you could be having a day where you're like, oh, gosh, how can I get out of this hole? And they're like, you've done it before, and they talk you round as well. I think it's great as well to bounce ideas off and have a sanity check. So yeah, I'm a massive fan of mentoring, and I think, as I said to you, it's been a massive thing I think it's really changed my ability to really enjoy coming to work, actually. I think as well, it's made my shift from actually I'm doing this because I love it, not just because I have to, and I do love what I do. So it's a big factor. No, that's great. So final thing, any bit of advice would you give to CEOs, CMOs or businesses at the moment that are looking to scale their business through effective marketing?
I think it just touches back to what we were talking about earlier. I think basically don't just market to prospects that are ready to buy. It sounds counterintuitive, but if you have the right sort of message for people who are considering buying a particular service that you offer, let's say there are 100 people who your message resonates with and think that the article you sent them is really interesting and you sound like a good company to work with. Of those 100, perhaps 2, 3 maybe will be ready to buy. Perhaps 2 or 3 will never buy. And all the rest will turn up at some stage over the next 3, 6, 12, 18, 24 months. So you must continue to reach out and find people who are absolutely right for you, that like the look and the way you present yourself as a business, but are not ready to buy. The more complex the product, the more that's the case. A product's just as valuable, a prospect rather, is just as valuable to you if the sale happens in a year's time and not today. So look after your upper funnel, nurture, support, provide value, and when they're ready to buy, you'll be in the driving seat to make the sale. Brilliant stuff.
Well, that concludes most of the questions I'm going to ask. Is there any question that I haven't asked you that you'd like me to ask?
If you're looking at your business and you think it can be possibly improved, what should you do? Bring in some fresh eyes to start. That would be my advice. Any business leader who's looking at their business and thinking, looking at their sales numbers or sitting down with the FD and running over revenues, looking at the growth, looking at how fast their market's growing in a particular area or how their predictions are lapping out and thinking, I think we could or should be doing better. I would say the first thing you do is bring in a fresh pair of experienced eyes to just take a look at what you're doing and help you to understand some of the things that are happening that you're no longer seeing because they're not obvious, or perhaps because your executive are not letting you see them. That's also a possibility. When you bring somebody in, quite often when I go into businesses now, I come in as the support for the CEO. And that gives me a right of access across the business to go and chat to people and have lunch and investigate and talk. And just in doing that, quite often, there's huge value in what I can report back to the CEO before we even start thinking about making any changes. So bring some fresh eyes in and it'll give you a new perspective on the business. That's a great starting point.
How do you want to be remembered as a leader?
I want to be remembered as someone who, if I say I'll do something, then I will do it. And that if I was ever asked to look over a business, I always managed somehow to make it a little bit better than it was before.
Amazing. And I'm sure that if we asked anybody about that, I'm sure they would absolutely say that they agree with that. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.